So, welcome to Unlocking Your Presenter Persona. It's not just what you say. So, let's dive straight in with a little scenario. And I think most people on the call today will have experienced something very similar at some life. I want you to picture sitting through a presentation. The slides are brilliant, they're beautiful, very clear. The data, completely flawless. The speaker, well, they're clearly an expert, a very experienced professional speaker. And yet, you get to about that 5, 10 minutes in, and you start to notice that your brain's wandering off subject. And perhaps you take out your phone and start to look at your phone. The information is good, but for some reason, it's just not landing. Now, just pop a quick yes in chat if you can identify with having been in a situation similar to that. Yes, Hannah, thank you. Wendy, lovely, thank you. Absolutely, maybe. Brilliant. Okay, so now we're going to flip that situation. And this time, I want you to think about a time that you were presenting something that you genuinely believed in, and you just watched it all fall apart in front of you. You'd prepared, you knew your material, and yet somewhere between your mouth and their brain, your audience's brain, it got lost. This time in chat, what I want you to do is put why you think, in your experience, that these types of presentations have perhaps just not landed. So what would you put it down to? Why didn't these two presentations land? Reading the signals from the audience put me off. Yep. Didn't plan enough with the questions they asked. Yep, fair point. Fair point. The thing is, what nobody very much talks about when we go on the usual kind of public speaking courses. I like that one, Hannah. My subject wasn't as exciting to them as it was to you. Yep, I've been there, done that one in my years. So the thing that we tend not to kind of talk about was the problem isn't really your content, nor your slides, and it's probably nothing to do with any nerves that you might be showing. It's to do with a behavioural mismatch. Your audience wasn't filtering your message through your logic. They were filtering it through their own wiring, their preferences, their pace, their priorities. And if your natural delivery style didn't match what their brain was primed to receive, their preferences, then your message basically was just hitting a wall. It didn't really stand a chance. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michelle MacArthur Morgan. I'm the founding partner of Jigsaw Discovery and creator of the Jigsaw Discovery tool. And I started my career originally in the hospitality sector, working both in operational and then working my way through into more senior leadership positions before moving into learning and development some 27 years ago now. And my work has taken me far and wide, working with organisations not only throughout the UK, but also in the UAE, Europe, the USA, in both public and corporate sectors. Academically, I have a degree in psychology. And for the last 18, 19 years now, I've been a student of neuroscience, following and studying the latest research, looking at what we can actually learn from that. And I'm a member of a global group called the Neuro Nerds, and we meet monthly online and we look at some of the latest research from the world of neuroscience, and then we say, okay, but what does this mean in the real world? What does this mean in the world of work? How can we apply this? What can we learn from this and take back into our organizations? So in our webinar today, we're going to look at the science, first of all, of why certain people receive and connect with you immediately and why others don't. And it doesn't matter how well you've prepared, they just don't connect with you. And by the end of the webinar, you'll understand your own presenter persona, the behavioural preferences that shape how we naturally show up when we do our presentations, when all eyes are on us. We'll be able to read a room in real time. We'll have insights into how our own individual style is actually being received by the audience. And you'll have specific practical tools for flexing your style, and so that your message actually lands, not just with people who think like you, but with everyone in the room. As usual, we'll divide into 4 chapters. Chapter 1, we're going to be looking at the neuroscience and psychology of connection. Chapter 2, your presenter persona. In 3, how your audience sees you. And in 4, honing your professional delivery. So we'll jump straight into the neuroscience and psychology of connection. So we're going to be looking and speaking about presenting to an audience through a slightly different lens, let's say. We're moving away from that generic tips and tricks and moving into more the psychology and neuroscience of connection. So the secret to a truly professional, engaging presentation isn't about changing who you are or putting on a performance. It's about understanding your natural behavioural preferences. And then what we call your presenter persona. And learning how that persona, or understanding how that persona impacts on the people sitting in your audience, whether that's in a big presentation or whether it's at the other side of a boardroom table. We all have a default setting, a way that we naturally prefer to process information and express ourselves. Some of us naturally want to get straight to the bottom line. No fluff, just give me the outcomes, just tell me the results. Others want to paint a vision, tell a story, get people really excited and engaged. Some of us want to prioritise making sure that everybody in the room feels engaged and included and is comfortable with what is being spoken about. Now, also, some people, they just want to get down to the granular detail, the evidence, and have a clear structure. Now, none of these styles are right or wrong. Every single one of them has massive strengths. But here's the catch. And it's the piece that probably trips most people up. Your natural strength as a presenter can become a distraction for your audience. If their behavioural preference is different to yours, that can create a distraction for the brain. Now, before we go on to find out more about which specific presenter persona you are, I want to lift the hood a little bit on what's actually happening inside our brains when we communicate. Whenever we stand up to present, whether it's to a room of 3 colleagues or 50 stakeholders, you aren't just managing a calendar invite. You're managing a room full of neurochemistry. Every single person in your audience is unconsciously filtering your words through their own brain chemistry. And as a presenter, your delivery acts as a trigger. You are either engaging a state of threat, or triggering, should I say, a state of threat and disengagement, or you're triggering a state of safety and connection and reward. Now, at Jigsaw, we actually look at this through the lens of something that is known as dose framework, the four primary neurochemicals that dictate human behaviour and engagement. And those are dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And when we understand how to activate these chemicals naturally, then we move from just talking to actually making genuine connections with our audience. So if we just take a little bit of a deeper look at each of these chemicals, and dopamine to start off with. Dopamine is released in anticipation of a reward, not just when that reward arrives. It drives our motivation, our focus, and the desire to engage. So how can we actually use this in a presentation context then? Well, here's a couple of little things that we can actually do. First of all, create curiosity gaps. Now, what I mean by that is just hinting at something really interesting before you actually reveal it. Just leave the audience hanging just for a moment. Storytelling, another great tool here for triggering dopamine. Tell the story, but just again, right at the end, leave the audience hanging. Leave a little bit of unresolved tension. Introducing a perhaps surprising statistic, fact, or a counterintuitive fact, again, can actually create a small dopamine hit. So your audience's brain is constantly asking, is this worth my attention? And when you trigger that dopamine, it is a resounding yes to the brain. But if we lose that dopamine thread, if we don't trigger that dopamine, because what we're saying, it's the same old, predictable, or it's information overload, then attention will drop away rapidly. Hence that 5 minutes, no dopamine, our attention is lost. Oxytocin. So oxytocin is actually known as the trust and bonding chemical because it's released through genuine human connection. When we show our vulnerability, when we feel that we are being seen and understood. And oxytocin helps to build trust. It reduces any kind of social threat responses. So again, how can we trigger oxytocin? Well, telling our personal stories and vulnerability, that can trigger oxytocin in the audience because they feel connected to you as a human being rather than the presenter. Eye contact, another way. Acknowledging the audience's experience. So saying something like, many of you will have experienced this, many of you will have felt this. It creates that sense of being understood. Asking genuine questions with curiosity. Listening to people when they ask their questions with curiosity. That is signalling to the audience that they matter. And that, again, is a powerful oxytocin trigger. So oxytocin is what transfers a presentation from a straightforward, simple transfer of information into a genuine connection experience. And it doesn't matter how brilliant your information is, your content is, it can still feel very cold and very easily forgettable if we don't trigger that oxytocin. Our third chemical, serotonin. The serotonin is all about feeling valued and respected, having our status acknowledged. And serotonin, therefore, is linked very closely to feelings of pride and significance and being valued. And for those of you who perhaps are aware of David Rock's SCARF model, it's deeply connected to the status social domain in David Rock's SCARF model. So again, how can we use it? Acknowledging the audience's expertise and experience. You probably already know more than you realise actually about this. It's acknowledging their experience, their expertise, giving them collective agency by offering them choices, participation, getting them involved in group exercises. It all signals that their contribution is important. Again, when an audience member asks a question, showing that genuine kind of respect and interest and curiosity triggers the serotonin release. So audiences who feel respected, valued, and significant are neurologically more open to new ideas. So serotonin can actually create the ideal conditions for genuine learning and behaviour change. And last but not least, endorphins. Endorphins referred to often as the relief, pain or pleasure chemical. And they're released through laughter, physical movement, shared experiences. And they create a real sense of kind of feeling good and feeling at ease, well-being. So again, how can we trigger the endorphins in our presentations? Well, humour is one way. Humour is one of the most powerful endorphin triggers. Actually building in movement breaks. So just asking people to stand and stretch or just turn to a neighbour. Shared physical experiences, such as if you're doing some group activities, energizers, again, create endorphin releases. So the practical implications here, endorphins are our secret weapon, actually. When you get to that kind of mid-presentation energy dip, well, a well-placed moment of genuine humour or movement can reset the entire room's neurological state through the triggering of the endorphins. So here's what's particularly powerful about viewing presentations through a dose lens. As you can see on screen, each neurochemical maps onto a different dimension of connection: intellectual, human, social, physical, and emotional. So a presentation that only delivers information, at best, will only activate dopamine. A presentation that you have designed deliberately, taking into consideration what you know about dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, then if you design it deliberately to trigger these 4 neurochemicals, then it creates an experience that the audience is going to remember. You're going to build a real connection and trust with the audience. And most importantly, really increase the likelihood that the audience will act on the information that you have shared. So I want to take just a moment or two for reflection. And I want you to think about a presentation you have done and think about, in a moment, I'm going to put up 4 kind of question points. I want you to think about each of the following. So, a dopamine check. Where am I creating genuine curiosity and anticipation? Think about a presentation that you have done, created recently, and just check it out against these 4 checks. The dopamine check, the oxytocin. Am I being genuinely human? Am I showing some vulnerability? Serotonin, where am I actually elevating my audience's sense of status, significance, expertise? And lastly, where are those moments of lightness or laughter and movement? Spend a moment just thinking about that. And if anybody's got any insights they want to share, please pop those in chat. There is no, you don't have to do that by any means. But if anybody's got any moments that they'd just like to, any insights they'd just like to share, that would be brilliant. So moving on to chapter 2 then. So we now know what's happening inside our brains. So it's time to kind of look in the mirror. I'm going to ask you to consider a couple of questions. Now, please don't overthink these questions. Just go with your gut reaction. So, question 1. When you're preparing for a critical presentation, your absolute priority, C or D? And just pop in chat, A, B, C, or D, please. There's no right or wrong answers here. If you're sitting there thinking it depends on the audience, that's actually instinct. It's actually telling you exactly what this session is about. That's bees. A moment, just see if anybody else. Mostly bees, yeah. Let's see. Brilliant. So let's look at question 2. When you are presenting now, which of these feels the most natural for you? A, B, C, or D? I don't know, winter season. Mostly C's, some D's. Perfect. My comment here is, given the nature of most people's roles in this on this call, then actually, for me personally, there aren't any real surprises in your selected answers. But it's worth if you ask these questions of some of your managers, your salespeople, and just check what answers are they giving? What is important to them? So let's introduce the 4 behavioural preferences first of all. If you're not familiar with Jigsaw, I'll just give you a very, very quick refresher on it, just very top level. If you are then familiar with Jigsaw, just bear with me for a moment or two. So our first, ever ready, we call her, the driven decision maker, fast, direct and punchy. Focuses on getting the results, return on investment, the bottom line. Then we have our ray of sunshine, our enthusiastic, visionary storyteller, creative and animated. Focuses very much on the big picture, stories and opportunities. Then we have our Carey, the supportive harmonizer, people person, sincere, calm, inclusive, with focuses very much on team impact and values. And our 4th preference, Mr. Huey Blue, the analytical expert, quite formal, precise, logical, and focuses very much on data and risk mitigation. Now let's meet those 4 unique presenter personas that emerge from those priorities, from those 4 preferences. As I describe them, I want you to listen out for which one feels most comfortable for you, most like what I would call your home base. Now, again, as with most things, the aim really the ultimate outcome is that we can actually move through the four different personas. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what I'm really wanting you to think about is what we call the home base. What is your kind of natural, if you haven't got any time to think about it, you just to put a presentation together, which actually feels most like you. So, first of all, are ever ready? The driven decision maker, as I said. If this is you, then your presentations are usually high impact, no nonsense. You view a presentation as a tool to drive action or to close a deal. You command the room. You tend to speak at a faster pace, and you'll likely give the conclusion, the outcome, in the first 2 minutes or so, because for you, it's about that bottom line. Then we have the ray of sunshine. And these are our enthusiastic energizers, the natural storytellers. Presentations are vibrant, spontaneous, heavy, tend to be heavier on the kind of the metaphors and the imagery. And they absolutely love working the room, getting people excited about future possibilities and opportunities. And for our ray of sunshines, a script is just like having to wear a straitjacket. They hate it. And then we've got our carers, that supportive harmonizer. Delivery is calm and measured, deeply sincere. They rarely say I, because they naturally will say we or our. They focus heavily on how a decision affects the team, the people, the long-term cultures, the value of an organisation. And they really excel at making people, the room, feel comfortable and safe. And finally, we have our Mr. Huey Blue, the analytical expert, the master of preparation. Delivery structured, objective, highly professional. They don't guess. They know. They have the facts. They've done their research. Every claim on a slide is backed by a metric, a citation, or a clear methodology. And that gives the audience that complete kind of feeling of certainty. So, which is kind of your natural kind of style, do you think? So, let's just do a quick piece of kind of self-reflection. And I want you to head over again to chat and type the colour preference that you think dominates your presentation style. And I want you to also put in there, though, one thing that worries you most when you're about to do a presentation, prepare for a presentation, step up and do the presentation. So your colour and one worry or concern. So if you're a blue, for example, your concern may be being caught out by a question that you don't have an answer to. Or Hannah, yeah, I'm seen as too unserious. Lisa's green. Green, how people will after the presentation. Okay. Oh, surrounded by idiots. Yeah, a good book. Now, what you're starting to actually see and emerge in those kind of comments is how our fears align perfectly with our behavioural preferences. You know, blues fear being inaccurate, yellow fears being boring, greens, the fear of making people feel comfortable, how they'll feel after the presentation, reds losing that momentum and control. And this is a real crucial takeaway from chapter 2, because your presentation style is driven by what your brain values most. But remember our core challenge. If you are presenting in your style, your values, to an audience that values something completely different, then a disconnect is going to occur. So before we move into chapter 3, I just want to take you back for a moment to the dose model again, the dose neurochemicals that we spoke about. And here's the absolute brilliant part, because the jigsaw behavioural preferences naturally align with these chemical drivers. A red preference naturally targets dopamine because they naturally want to focus on goals and results. A yellow preference boosts the release of endorphins and dopamine through their energy and their vision. The green preference naturally fosters the oxytocin through that deep connection and empathy they're able to build. And the blue preference builds serotonin and trust by providing that structure and accuracy and certainty. So a secret here to becoming a master presenter is actually learning how you can blend these chemicals so that your audience actually get a complete balanced dose of connection. So to help you in preparing and integrating the dose chemicals into our presentations, then we need to ask ourselves these 4 questions. What motivates and rewards if we want to trigger dopamine? Now, we need to ask these questions of each of the 4 preferences. So, what motivates the red or the yellow, the green, the blue, for example? How do I build trust with a red or a green, a yellow or a blue? How do I help them feel valued and respected? Because the way that we do that with a red will be very different to the yellow, the green, or the blue, and vice versa. And how do I inject humour and light relief? And again, how we would inject humour and light relief for a blue would be very different for the yellow. So moving into chapter 3 then. Now we know our natural home base, hopefully. Let's talk about a hard truth in communication. Intent does not equal impact. When we're operating on behavioural autopilot, especially under that slight stress of giving a presentation, many people revert to their natural home base, their autopilot. And our greatest strengths can actually cross the line and become our audience's biggest distractions. And this is what we call the perception gap. So I'm just going to go through the 4 characters and give you kind of both sides of the coin, if you like. The red presenter thinks they're being efficient and decisive and dynamic. But in a room full of people who need context before they commit, who need to understand the why before they'll accept the what, that red energy can read as a bit of bulldozing. It reads as, my agenda matters far more than questions, your questions being the audience's questions. To a supportive harmonizer, the green audience, that red can come across very much because they're focused on that bottom line delivery. It can actually come across as feeling quite aggressive or intimidating and dismissive of other people's feelings. The same for the yellow, who thinks they're being inspiring, creative, and engaging. But that yellow presenter in a room full of people who need precision, who came to evaluate, not to be inspired, that warmth can read as noise. Stories feel like detours. Energy feels like it's covering for a lack of substance. So a skeptical blue or a results-focused red will mentally check out. To a blue, that spontaneous, story-driven style can look like you're disorganized, superficial, unprepared. Green presenters, they see themselves as being considerate, careful, inclusive. But the green presenter in a room that wants direction, that came for answers, not for consensus, can feel indecisive. That care that they display can be read as a lack of confidence. The checking in reads as even the presenter isn't sure. And a red audience in particular will start to fill in the kind of the vacuum with their own agenda. And so the green can start to be seen as being hesitant, slow, lacking in conviction. The blue presenter, who thinks they're being thorough and precise and professional, but again, in a room that needs a decision, that's been living with this problem for months, and they came here to get the answer, then that rigour just reads as delay. The caveats read as doubt. The thoroughness reads as I'm not ready to commit. And by the time the blue presenter gets to their recommendations, the room has just, they've lost the thread. They've lost the will to live. Or even worse, the red has got so frustrated in waiting that they've just jumped in and taken the meeting over. To an energetic yellow, those 50 slides of data and a rigid script that is being read word for word can feel really cold and clinical and completely uninspiring. So let's think back again to our neuroscience that we talked about a few minutes ago. If you dump 50 slides of raw data on somebody who has that high yellow preference, you aren't going to trigger serotonin or dopamine. You're actually going to drive up their cognitive load. So, in effect, what that means, you're starting to stress out the brain. Now, I'm not going to go into it here because we talk about it many, many times about the brain's threat response. But in effect, we're going to trigger a threat response. And when the threat response is triggered, the first thing that starts to happen is the brain goes into survival mode. So we actually start to shut down our cognitive processing abilities. So when an audience member's brain goes into that subtle state of stress or threat because of the mismatch in delivery style with their processing preference, their brain is literally going to start to close down. So they stop being able to actually absorb your content. So if you're pitch perfect for your own preference, for your own colour, you'll only ever truly connect with the people in the room who share your exact preference. But if you want to win over the entire room, then we have to learn to speak to the brains that work differently than ours. So we can use a technique called the mirror technique. And this is how we can actually fix this, making that connection without losing our authenticity. Before you even open your mouth, look at the room. Now, if you're presenting internally to your leadership team or perhaps externally to a major client, ask yourself, what is the dominant preference of the decision makers in this room? If you're presenting to, let's say, a high-ranking stakeholder with a strong red preference, say it's a busy executive looking for a major investment, then they don't want a 20-minute presentation that takes them on detours all around. They just want the outcome. Those first couple of minutes, they want to know the outcome. So you need to mirror, first of all, their need for speed and for precision. Cut out a lot of that introductory fluff. That doesn't mean to say be rude, but They don't want all the fluffs. It's a lovely day today. Today, how's the weather? Or I like that suit. Or oh, I love the new hairstyle. Fluff. Get rid of it. Look them in the eye. Speak directly to the bottom line, the financial, the operational impact, the things that they want to know. Keep your projections realistic, clear. And if it involves quoting finances, make sure that you're quoting in their local terms. Here in the UK, Great British Pounds. But by subtly mirroring the behavioural needs of the room, you actually start to lower their cognitive defence mechanisms. And this is when the door starts to open to make that real connection, to build trust and connection. So, honing our professional or your professional delivery. And we're going to give you a specific strategy tool for each one of the 4 presenter personas. So we'll begin with red, the driven decision maker. Natural drive, energy, pace are fantastic for keeping a room awake. But because the brain of a red preference processes information so quickly, then there is a tendency to race ahead of your audience, leaving your audience behind, and certainly leaving the more reflective thinkers in your audience almost gasping for air. For goodness sake, give me a break. So here we suggest the level up tool being the 3-second rule. When you deliver a major takeaway, a critical statistic or a bottom line result, intentionally build in a stop, a pause. Stop talking, close your mouth, count to 3 in your head, and let the silence do the heavy lifting. You're giving people that space, the space to catch up, the space to reflect, to process the information. Silence isn't empty space. It's a psychological space that your audience needs to process the value of what you've just said. And a little experiment you can try later if your natural persona is the red, or you're wanting to practice actually pitching to a red. Imagine that you're going to pitch a new project, and instead of doing your usual kind of introduction, write a 1-sentence, high-impact red opening that gives the goal and the result. So it's a way of developing some of that flexibility to build your ability to be able to flex your style and actually present in a more red fashion when required. Looking at the yellow presenters then, the enthusiastic energizers, the natural storyteller. But the challenge is that sometimes that enthusiasm that they have can really take them off track. And they can go on all these wonderful scenic detours. You might start with a case study and suddenly, a funny story, analogy comes into your mind and you start talking about that, and suddenly 10 minutes have gone of the critical time, the really valuable time that you have been allotted. So here, a tool you can use is the clicker discipline. So treat your slide deck, should I say, not as a script, but as a physical kind of safety rail. Think of it more as a safety rail. It's your visual anchor. And when you're presenting, look at the slide to keep reminding yourself, this is what I'm speaking about right here and now. And when you start to catch yourself drifting off on a tangent, then quickly use your clicker. Move on to the next slide. And that physical act of changing to the next slide, changing the screen, forces our brains to reset. It forces us to wrap up the story and to move on. And it keeps you both engaging and on time. So, another little practice here. Practice telling a client success story within 60 seconds. So if you're yellow and you have that tendency to go off on tangents, just practice telling a story, a client success story, or that kind of key information in 60 seconds, and actually time yourself and stop in a hard 60 seconds, because it forces you to cut the fluff and keep the high energy kind of punchy delivery. Our green presenters, the supportive harmonizers, incredible at building psychological safety, warmth, and consensus. However, one of the things they hate the idea of is imposing their ideas on other people. And that can actually lead to them using more hesitant kind of language, like, I just thought, or, well, hopefully. So we're going to give you two tools here, the nose and the pivot. So if direct eye contact feels a bit too intense for you, and it can do to some people that have a green preference, don't look actually at people directly in their eyes. Just look at the bridge of their nose. Now, to your audience, it's just going to come across as if you're looking into their eyes, making normal eye contact. But for you, it feels a whole lot less threatening. And the pivot is where we deliver firm recommendations, but we start with our natural strength of collaboration and then pivot into a clear demand. So we could say something such as, I've spoken with the team and I've integrated their feedback, and based on that, my clear recommendation is to move forward with option A. So there you are, standing firm, making firm, clear recommendations, displaying your authority, because it allows us to be both supportive, but at the same time, completely authoritative. And finally, our blue presenters, the analytical experts. Presentation is unmatched. You give the room, immense psychological certainty by the level of detail and data that is available. But the pitfall can be death by PowerPoint. You risk drowning your audience in data and tables and technical specifications, because actually, that's what you like. And you want to show all your workings out, because that's how a blue person can display their passion. So the tool here is what we call the so what. For every single chart, graph, or metric on the slide, you must state one human or financial implication. So you can't just have data alone. You must finish the data and then add to it, and what this means for us or for you is. So instead of just saying system downtime is decreased by, I don't know, 4.2%, follow it through by saying something like system downtime decreased by 4.2%. And what this means is an extra 14 hours of productive team time every single week. Turn metrics into meaning. And a little activity here that is good for blues preferences to actually practice is think of a complex kind of subject, a complex thought, and boil it down as if you had to explain, let's say, take your job or a latest project, break it all the way down to simple, clear language that you could explain and use as if you were explaining your project to a 10-year-old. No technical jargon. Just think, what would I say in plain, simple language? So we've covered quite a lot of ground today, from the neurochemicals dose, which your audience brain craves, to the specific leveling up tools that we've just talked about for your different personal presenter personas. So as we come to the end, again, just like a moment of reflection, what are maybe, one of your key takeaways from today? And if you could just share that in chat, that would be absolutely wonderful. Adapt your styles to the audience, absolutely. Yeah. Presenter personas like situational. Yeah, absolutely, Tim. Yeah. Appeal to the audience, turn metrics into meanings. Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thank you. So, a final thought for today. It's about authenticity. Here at Jigsaw, one of our core guiding principle is quite simple, really. We want to normalise being human in the workplace. And flexing your style to connect with a colleague, a client, team member doesn't mean changing who you are. It doesn't mean putting on a fake, extroverted performance or hiding your analytical brilliance. It simply means choosing to be thoughtful enough to meet people where they are, something that we often refer to as being human centric. So please think about that when you're putting together presentations, whether that's a sales presentation, a team meeting presentation, any kind of presentation. Just think about, where are my audience at and how do I meet them where they are at? Remember, we're writing the presentation for our audience, not for ourselves. So that brings us to the end of today. Thanks for joining us.